Welcome back to SFF180 Retro, the series where I talk about older SFF novels, not necessarily classics, but definitely worth your time tracking down. In this episode, a man desperately searches for his missing wife following a global wave of telepathic terror that has swept human society in Jack Dann's The Man Who Melted. Hello everybody, Thomas here as always, thank you so much for joining me. Now, Jack Dann first rose to prominence in the early 1970s, mostly as an editor. He did quite a few respected anthologies, mostly working alongside Gardner Dozois. The Man Who Melted was only his third novel. Now, it didn't escape appreciation at the time. After all, it was a Nebula nominee, the same year that Neuromancer won. However, to the vast bulk of SFF reading fandom, yeah, it was a pretty obscure book both then as now. Now, I recall having to order a copy. In fact, I still got my original copy. This is the 1985 hardcover edition from Blue Jay Books. I know, really ugly cover. You know, this wasn't just on the racks. I had to special order this, and I can tell you, back in the days before Amazon and the internet, having to special order a book from its publisher through an actual bookstore was a monumental pain in the ass. Now, back in 2007, the book was reissued in trade paperback by Pyre. It didn't sell then either. But I think this little rarity still deserves to find a bigger audience. It's not a book for every audience. It helps if, like me, your tastes run towards the darker end of the fiction spectrum. It's a book that challenges you not through any convolutions of its plot, but by the way in which it lays our most private places bare. It's an absorbing but often painful trek into the dark spaces that we conceal from both ourselves and the ones we love. It really is unlike anything else in the genre, and I'd say that adventurous readers who are hankering for incisive, character-driven SF will find much to admire and reflect upon in this book. The Man Who Melted is all about the secrets that hide beneath surfaces. It's about the way people deal with the collapse of everything that has defined their lives, and more specifically, the lies they tell themselves in order to avoid confronting terrible truths. Its future is one that has not fully recovered from the Great Scream, a global outbreak of collective madness in which millions of rioting lunatics, more or less normal people who, as one character describes it, simply could not adjust to a dysfunctional society, came within a hair's breadth of destroying all society. But how can society be dysfunctional unless all of its people are dysfunctional first? The novel portrays a future in which the inability of the individual to reconcile himself with society results in an epidemic of schizophrenia that taps into the collective unconsciousness. The ironic result is that socially isolated individuals finally come together through mob violence and insanity. Raymond Mantle lost his wife, also his sister, Josiane, during the Great Scream. He's now living in the south of France as a painter, specializing in subliminal images, and he is now desperate to find her, either dead or alive, in order to recover his own lost memories surrounding the event. It isn't so much obsessive love for Josiane that is driving him. Indeed, he has a new lover, but it's more of a burning need to fill in his own gaps, so to speak. But there may be secrets motivating him that even he is not willing to admit to himself. Now, screamer attacks are still occurring, and in order to help them process and make light of the madness of life, people are finding themselves drawn to different distractions, to varying degrees of extremism, like gambling, where your internal organs are your ante. Others have turned to new and old religions. While a charismatic Mahdi has arisen in the Middle East, some people in the West have found themselves drawn to this thing called the Crying Church. It is to them Mantle goes to find a possible link to Josiane through their ghoulish practice of hooking into the minds of dying screamers. Well, you know what Nietzsche said about staring too long into the abyss. Mantle finds himself exposed to the dark spaces, a terrifying realm of collective unconsciousness that is inhabited by the minds of the dead. His mind also becomes receptive to the circuit fantôme, the telepathic ability to collect with the minds of other people he knows without artificially hooking in. And what he discovers is a twisted web in which deception is layered on top of deception that could link him to an imminent return of the Great Scream, this time more powerfully destructive than ever. Now, by rights, Mantle and the other characters shouldn't be likable at all. They all seem to be lost in varying degrees of self-absorption. But Dann renders them ultimately sympathetic, because their journeys involve coming to terms with to whatever degree they are responsible for what's befallen them, and whether or not they'll be able to break down the barriers that they've constructed in order to shield themselves from intimacy, duty, and truth and finally be able to connect with one another. In the end, the novel's themes do return to those old standbys, redemption and forgiveness. But what these characters have to endure in order to get themselves to this point is a lot more harrowing than probably most anything you've read in stories that purport to be all about the dark night of the soul. Dann ratchets up the story's dramatic tension to an almost unbearable degree as it nears its apocalyptic climax, and the book may very well leave you feeling drained. But if it has, then it's done its job, because most times the only way to effectively deal with pain is when it's shared. And that is all I have time for in this episode of SFF180 Retro. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You're not always going to agree with me, but thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe. That is how SFF180 grows as a channel. And until I see all of you next time, happy reading.